Coming up on Tech News Weekly, I'm Mikah Sargent, and I am joined by my pal Dan Moren. We kick things off by talking about the sale of indie ebooks. Then, hackers hijacking WordPress sites and what you need to know, why everyone is talking about DeepSeek, and my interview with Eric Migicovsky about bringing back the Pebble Smartwatch. Stay tuned for this episode of Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 372, with Dan Moren and me, Mikah Sargent. Recorded Thursday, January 30th, 2025. Return of the Pebble Smartwatch. Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am your host, Mikah Sargent, and I am joined across this vast and ever-changing landscape that is the internet by someone who you might not expect because it is the final Thursday of the month, and we don't typically have someone scheduled for this Thursday, but we do today. It's Dan Moren. Hello, Dan.
Nobody expects me, Mikah. I'm the unexpectable. That's what they call me, the unexpectable.
I like it. Hello, unexpectable Dan. Thank you for being here today. We've got some stories of the week before we get to an interview at the end of the show that I am excited about. But I'm very excited because you are uniquely qualified for...
Oh, boy. You can tell. Could you go back in time and tell one of my high school teachers about this? I'd love for them to know I'm uniquely qualified for basically anything.
You are uniquely qualified for being able to look at how tech and writing comes together. And that is your story of the week and the first story of the week we are discussing today. Tell us what's going on with ebooks and kind of your initial thoughts about things.
Sure. Yeah. Earlier this week, an organization called bookshop.org announced they would now be selling ebooks. Now, if you're not familiar with bookshop.org, here's the sort of top level idea. This is essentially a site that acts as a middleman between your local independent bookstore and you. So if you want to buy a book, up to this point, a paperback book, for example, or hardcover book, and you're like, well, I would love to buy it from my local independent bookstore, but maybe they don't have an online store. Bookshop.org enters the pictures there and say, okay, look, we'll basically act as the front-end marketplace for your local independent bookstore. You buy the book through us, and we will give the profits, the full profits, 30% to the local independent bookstore of your choice, which is a great deal, right? I mean, it's good for bookstores that may not have the time or money or energy to basically set up their own online marketplaces. And it just makes it a lot easier for consumers to support local independent bookstores instead of buying by default through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or one of the big chains. Mm-hmm. So this week, bookshop.org announced that they would be adding ebooks to their roster, which again, sounds well and good. I mean, you probably can't go into your local independent bookstore and say, I'd like to buy an ebook, please. It's not really a thing.
Flash drive.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what they do. All right, we've scraped some bits off the page and here you go. Now, this came with some caveats to it. I mean, I think this idea is great. Opening that up to independent bookstores is fantastic. And bookshop.org, I will say, I have not done any specific work with them, but many of the books that I've written are listed through there because it's basically a store like Amazon or Kobo or Barnes & Noble. However, there are some challenges here, right? And what I find interesting about it is all these obstacles are put in place basically by bigger companies, whether they be publishers or big tech companies. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of the problems is, as always, as so often is common, these ebooks are protected by DRM, digital rights management. Now, pretty much any book you buy anywhere, Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, whatever, is protected by some sort of DRM scheme. This has been the way with digital media for a very long time. You don't have to go back. You can go back to 20 years, basically, to, MP3s and Napster and all of that to see music industry talking about putting on DRM on all their music. Obviously, video files you buy now or music files you buy now from big stores like the, Apple stores or Amazon or whatever are all protected with DRM. Streaming stuff's all protected with DRM, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Now, There's some frustrations here, right? Because this means that, for example, if bookshop.org, you want to be able to buy an ebook from them and read it, you're going to have to use their app, which is available on iOS and Android. So great, all the modern phones, iPads, etc. But, if you want to move that to an e-reader, you're going to have a problem because there's not really a good way to do that for DRM protected titles. Now, Bookshop has said basically, Android-based e-reader devices may be able to, install our app and read on there, but your mileage is going to vary. It doesn't sound like they've tested it so much that they say, well, technically those are Android devices. They can install an Android app. They also say that they're planning on working with Kobo and adding some integration for that at some point further in the future. But, obviously Kindle's the big player there, and you're unlikely to be able to load these ebooks onto your Kindle without jumping through some hoops, which is to say circumventing the DRM, which is a thing that you can definitely do if you know where to look. I mean, those resources are out there. The technology exists. A lot of this DRM has been cracked, as it always is. But it means jumping through a bunch of hoops. It means, doing some technological work that you may or may not want to do, and it's just time-consuming and annoying. And so that's sort of one of the big things is that the publishers impose this, right? Publishers are putting DRM on all their ebooks because they are concerned about piracy. Never mind the fact that all these books are pirated anyways because the DRM gets cracked and these things get uploaded. It's not really stopping anything. What it does do is crack down on perfectly legal uses of things like, hey, Mikah, I want to loan you this book I read. Well, you're all the way across the country from me. I can't exactly mail you a copy. I could, but at that point, is it cheaper than you going out and buying a copy? But if I had an ebook I wanted to loan you, there's really no way to do that. And, I get it. This is a fundamental problem with digital media, period, right? Because when I loan you a copy, you have a perfect copy of it, right? Yeah. In a physical realm, obviously, we're limited by the fact that there is one book that I am loaning you and then you are returning to me. Maybe. Now, maybe if I trust you. Some places have circumvented this, right? Amazon and Apple both allow some degree of purchase sharing between you and other people in your household, but that's usually a limited number of people, and sometimes it's also dependent on the licensing of that media. So this is problem one. Problem two, which I think is, perhaps just as insidious some way, but can be laid more at the feet of some more limited number of companies, is bookshop.org on their FAQ. They basically are asked, they have a bunch of questions, and one of them is, can I buy books through your app? Now, if you are somebody who follows any of these things, the answer is probably no. And yes, indeed, it is no. Why? Because if you want to sell your books through the iOS app or through a Google app, both Apple and Google want to take 30%. Now, if you might remember earlier in this conversation, I mentioned to you that when you bought a paper book through bookshop.org, they gave the profits to the independent bookstore, and that number was also 30%. So if you need to give 30% to Apple or Google, and you still want to give 30% to the bookstore, to sort of say, okay, you're buying from your local independent bookstore and they should get the profit, you're going to have some math problems here. You got only a few options. One, you raise the price to build in more room for profit. Two, you just forego that chunk of profit, which is a good way to put yourself out of business. Mm-hmm. Or three, you do what they're doing, and the answer is we don't sell books through the app. You've got to buy them through the web and then load them up in your book app of choice. This is nothing new, right? If you want to buy a Kindle book right now, you got to go to Amazon.com, buy a Kindle book, then open your Kindle app and get it in there. It's just a hoop to jump through. But this has been going on for a super long time because the platform owners want to get their cut. And while don't begrudge, Apple and Amazon and Spotify battling it out as to who gets the lion's share of that money, it does feel a little more galling when you're dealing with an independent local bookstore, not exactly a business known for being flush with cash. Moreover, if you're an independent local bookstore selling ebooks, a thing that Apple also does, and they are charging you a 30% cut for that, which they are definitely not charging themselves, then you start to have more concerns about, wow, isn't there a word for that, perhaps? Something about being against competition? I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. Anyway, that's a bit again another sort of thing that I think will be a bit of an impediment to them. Now, I wish them well. I think it's a good setup, and the idea of being able to support your local independent bookstore with ebooks is a great one. But the fact is that these, the power is still in the hands of both these big companies, whether they be publishers or big tech companies, and that's hurting both the independents and it's hurting end users as well, because the people who just want to read books and download them and read them on their e-reader or wherever can't do that from the source of their choice. They're locked into these platform ecosystems all too often. So I think it's an unfortunate state of affairs, and I don't know that it's likely to change anytime soon, but it is a bit disheartening at times.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. The part that didn't make as much sense to me is, so obviously with the way that it is right now before this announcement, the bookshop.org option to buy a book and say, this is my local bookstore, and then the bookstore gets a cut. And that, in my mind, makes more sense for everybody involved because it's a physical thing that is getting... So is this just bookshop.org kind of doing this ebook thing out of the goodness of its heart when it comes to these local... Because why do they involve the local bookstores at all, as opposed to just selling these ebooks itself?
I think the answer is, I believe, and I will double check this to be sure, but I think they are a nonprofit. I mean, they are bookshop.org, right? Not bookshop.com.
Yeah.
And I think they are essentially, they do this in a couple ways. Like, for example, when you do that ebook when you buy a book through them, either they give the proceeds to the independent bookstore of your choice. You can also opt to not support, like, basically, I haven't picked a bookstore, I just want to buy it through them. You can do that. And then they will basically set aside a percentage, smaller than full profit, to a pool that they have that's shared among all their partnered bookstores. So they still do make some money off the sales, and that, I presume, goes to fund just the overhead of this thing.
Right.
But the kind of mission that they had and that they were founded with is this idea of, we want to basically help support local independent bookstores and connect them directly with customers, which is something that just, wasn't really an option before. So, that is the basically what they're doing for the large part, is to essentially be like, we're sort of acting as a middleman, yes, but in order to, help support these local bookstores, we take a little bit, for our overhead. We kick most of it back. You can look on their website. They talk about where their profits go. Most of it goes to these independent bookstores. But yeah, I think it's just sort of an attempt to challenge the hegemony that you've got from companies like Amazon, which are just overwhelmingly powerful in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shapes, I'm sure, the way that it's not just the bookstores, it's the authors, it's the public, everybody is shaped by the way that Amazon does what it does. And having this small but collective group is I don't know, I'm always going to root for the underdog in that way, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a cool place to go, bookshop.org, to kind of opt for your local bookshop and be able to support them while you're already if you're going to buy a book, try doing it through this.
Yeah. And I mean, always good if you have a local bookstore and you like to buy physical books, that's a great option as well. But, sometimes you don't have one, or sometimes you've moved and you want to support a bookshop where you used to live or something like that. So I think there's a lot of reasons you might want to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a cool idea too. I hadn't considered that maybe there was one you used to frequent and you haven't been there in a while and you want to help support them. So very, very cool. All right, we are going to take a quick break before we come back with the next story of the week. This time it's a bit of a PSA regarding some WordPress sites. But before we get there, let me tell you about US Cloud, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. US Cloud is the #1 Microsoft Unified Support replacement. And anybody out there who knows about Microsoft Unified Support probably just felt their wallet or their bank groan in sadness, because Microsoft Unified Support is very expensive. And that's where US Cloud comes in and helps out. We've been talking about US Cloud for a few months, and it's the global leader in third-party Microsoft support for enterprises, now supporting 50 of the Fortune 500. Switching to US Cloud can save your business 30 to 50% over Microsoft Unified and Premier support. And it's faster, 2 times faster average time to resolution versus Microsoft. But now US Cloud is excited to tell you about a new offering. It's Azure Cost Optimization Services. So let's take a moment. Let me ask you, be honest. When was the last time you actually evaluated your Azure usage? If it's been a while, you probably have some Azure sprawl, a little spend creep going on. But the good news is saving on Azure is easier than you think with US Cloud. So US Cloud offers an 8-week Azure engagement powered by VBox that identifies key opportunities to reduce costs across your entire Azure environment. With expert guidance, you'll get access to US Cloud's senior engineers with an average of more than 16 years with Microsoft products. And at the end of those 8 weeks, your interactive dashboard will identify, rebuild, downscale opportunities and unused resources, allowing you to reallocate your precious IT dollars towards needed resources. Or you can invest your Azure savings in US Cloud's Microsoft support, like a few of US Cloud's other customers, and completely eliminate your unified spend. Sam, the technical operations manager at Bead Gaming, gives US Cloud 5 stars, saying, "We found some things that had been running for 3 years, which no one was checking. These VMs were, 10 grand a month? Not a massive chunk in the grand scheme of how much we spent on Azure, but once we got to 40K or 50K a month, it really started to add up." So it's simple. Stop overpaying for Azure. Identify and eliminate Azure creep and boost your performance all in 8 weeks with US Cloud. Super cool, the work that these folks do. And, talking to them and asking, okay, so why is it that you're so much faster and that you don't cost as much? And learning about the team that they've put together and how, going with that unified support is kind of a, oh, yes, we all agreed that this is the price that it is. It doesn't have to be that much, and it can be faster and better. So you, like those Fortune 500 companies, should check out US Cloud. Visit uscloud.com and book a call today to find out how much your team can save. That's uscloud.com to book a call today and get faster Microsoft support for less. Thank you, US Cloud, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Alrighty, back from the break, and that means it is time to talk about the piece that I promised. This is a TechCrunch piece from Lorenzo Franceschi Bicchierai. For those of you who have been longtime Tech News Weekly viewers or listeners, you'll recognize the name. Lorenzo's been on the show a number of times, and he wrote a piece just yesterday as we record this about hackers hijacking WordPress sites and using these hijacking attempts to get people to install malware. And so this is kind of just a little PSA. So what they did is, I should say some researchers were working to discover some malware that they started to see pop up. This is the web security company Seaside, which is C/side. And they used some clever techniques to kind of scour the web and use some reverse DNS lookup stuff to determine the different sites that were hijacked. And what's happening is Seaside says that there have been more than 10,000 websites they've discovered that are responsible for actually, having this hijacking take place that results in the prompting of malware download. So let's talk about what this actually looks like. If you were to visit one of these sites, these WordPress sites on your Windows PC or your Mac, then when you go there, this is in Chrome specifically, on the Chrome browser, it displays instead of the site, so, I'm going to www.thisisafakesite.com because I don't want to name another one. Then it will start to load that page, and then it switches over and shows a fake Chrome browser update page. And so it makes it look like you need to update your Chrome browser. You go through the process of updating your Chrome browser, and it results in you downloading and installing this update. If you do so, then you download this malicious file that is indeed malware. And again, it will serve whichever version you need, depending on whether you're running Mac OS or you're running Windows. And so when you download this, it results in the installation of Amos, which is Amos Atomic Stealer. That's for Mac OS, and Sock Ghoulish, which is SOCGHOLISH, which is after Windows users. Now, these tools are, what do they call them? They're called info stealers or something along those lines. Basically, it's malware that crawls throughout your system and looks for as much information as possible, pulls that and uses it to gather cryptocurrency wallet numbers and passwords, usernames, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the big thing to understand here is that according to this piece from TechCrunch, this specific macOS malware is one that has been created as a malware as a service kind of tool. So what that means is there are developers who have created this malware, and instead of being the hackers, so to speak, themselves, meaning that they create a piece of software and then they work to get it installed on a machine so that they can gain access to that information. No, they just make it available for purchase, and then someone gets it and does the work of installing it on a machine so they can get whatever they want from it. It's like a marketplace of malware, and this is a very common one for macOS. Now, one good thing about this is that when it comes to, and the piece mostly focused on the macOS side of things, I'm kind of curious about how exactly it looks and what exactly it does on the Windows side. But on the macOS side, there are a lot of hurdles involved. And anyone who's ever installed third-party software that is trusted on macOS will be, third-party software that is trusted, that requires some special permissions, will be familiar with the hoops one must, through which one must jump, in order to install that software. So you can imagine, because I have to, every time it's rare these days, but I have to write it down or like get my little, print out a little piece of paper that has the steps. And I'm imagining a person who doesn't, because this is mostly targeting people who don't necessarily realize what they're doing, but you gotta like run a special startup mode and do these different things to gain. So it's pretty involved. And that means that a lot of people probably aren't going to do it correctly, which means that it's less likely that it'll be installed, but it can still happen, particularly if someone, is good at following instructions. So this is more of a PSA, I think, for people out there who listen to this show, who have family and friends who use the Chrome browser. Tell them about this, that this is going on, because WordPress is part of the sort of foundational framework of the internet, in the sense that a lot of different sites and particular publications make use of WordPress as their site engine. So something to keep in mind. I remember, Dan, a time where you could almost just say, I'm running Mac OS, I don't have anything to worry about. And those days have gone.
Yeah, long gone. I mean, big part of it is the fact that the underpinnings of Mac OS are based in, Unix, NetBSD. And so therefore there's more knowledge both of what the platform entails, as well as sort of more broadly applicable technologies that can be used to exploit that. But some of it is just that it's become a more and more popular platform over the past 2 decades. And so it's more worthwhile for the people developing this malware to target it because they get a better return on their investment. So I still think in general it feels as though, malware is less of a problem on the Mac than it is on Windows. I have never run malware or anti-malware or spamware, whatever, programs on my Mac, on any of my Macs in the last several decades, and that has not changed as a result of this. But yeah, it's not to say it doesn't exist, just that it's the scale of the problem is different.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know anyone who has, and I certainly haven't installed or come across any knock on wood malware on my machines. But you still hear those stories of people, they call up they call up the family member that knows what they're doing when it comes to tech, and they're like, "Yeah, my computer has a virus. My internet told me that my computer has a virus, and I went ahead and did the scan." And they're like, "Wait, you did the scan? What do you mean you did the scan?" "Well, they popped up and they said download this, and then it'll scan." And you're going, "No! Like, how far have you gone? No,
it's too late." Burn that computer.
It's too late. Exactly. Throw that thing away, salt it, et cetera. So yeah, for people, again, who listen to the show, it's just a good bit of knowledge to have and share with others that, hey, here is exactly how you install a Chrome update. If you're ever presented with any other way to install a Chrome update, do not do that thing. And if you get a prompt that says there's an update, ignore the prompt, cancel the prompt, do whatever, and go to this page to do the actual update. That is good advice across, in fact, all software. As much as possible, I will, if I see something pop up and say, "Oh, I've got an update," I'm going to go back to the source and make sure that I'm getting it that way, so that I know what it is that I'm after.
I will say I did make me go to my blog. My personal website is hosted on WordPress, so of course I immediately went over there. It's like, make sure everything's up to date. Make sure all my plugins are up to date. Everything looks
That's
fine.
A good point too. Yes, if you are running a WordPress site, go and make sure everything's working as it should be, and that you have clicked the multiple check for update buttons that you need to, so that you are not responsible for anybody getting hacked through this. By the way, it was info stealer is the term. All right. It is time. That sounds like a villain in like The Incredibles or something. Let's take another quick break before we come back with our final story of the week. Zscaler is here to bring you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Zscaler is the leader in cloud security. Enterprises have spent billions, with a B, of dollars on firewalls and VPNs. Despite that, breaches continue to rise by an 18% year-over-year increase in ransomware attacks and a $75 million record payout in 2024. These traditional security tools expand your attack surface with public-facing IPs that are exploited by bad actors more easily than ever because of AI tools. And they struggle to inspect encrypted traffic at scale, allowing compromise. VPNs and firewalls, they enable lateral movement by connecting users to the entire network that allows data loss via encrypted traffic and other leakage paths. Hackers exploit traditional security infrastructure using AI to outpace your defenses. It's time to rethink your security. Do not let bad actors win. They're innovating and exploiting your defenses. Zscaler, Zero Trust plus AI, stops attackers by hiding your attack surface, making apps and IPs invisible, eliminating lateral movement, connecting users only to specific apps, not the entire network, continuously verifying every request based on identity and context, simplifying security management with AI-powered automation, and detecting threats using AI to analyze more than 500 billion daily transactions. Hackers can't attack what they can't see. So protect your organization with Zscaler, Zero Trust, and AI. Learn more at zscaler.com/security. That's zscaler.com/security. Alrighty, we are back from the break, and it is time for our final story of the week. You probably have heard a lot about DeepSeek over the past couple of days, few days now. And I thought it'd be a good idea. We thought it'd be a good idea to kind of talk about what DeepSeek is and why it's kind of got everyone's attention. I want to point everybody to an article over on The Verge. I had invited the authors to join me on the show. They were unavailable. Kylie Robison and Elizabeth Lopato, who probably Lopato, but they wrote a piece for The Verge that is explaining why everybody's freaking out about DeepSeek. So DeepSeek is, of course, an AI company, I should say, out of China that has two AI models that are kind of in the public eye. When the company released its first model, there was some level of attention being paid to it around Christmas time. And then the big change happened when it released its second model, wherein the company claimed that it was able to create this model and do what some of the premier American AI companies have been able to do without spending as much money. And that caught everybody, I wouldn't say by surprise necessarily, except for the market, which it seemed to catch by surprise, at which point we saw a huge dip in the market for some of these companies. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what's going on here. Basically, up to this point, we have had sort of this official understanding, right, of the way that these AI models need to work and need to be created, where you have kind of a great grouping of information, and you train your AI model against that grouping of information, and then you further refine it by looking at inputs and outputs to say, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, and kind of going down from there until you finally have this model that is capable of spitting out responses that are expected. Then we saw the AI companies kind of take what used to be almost part of the training side of things and add it to the model available to us as consumers or developers or what have you, where after it's been trained, now we're still spitting out multiple responses and kind of choosing the best one from that group. That's the reasoning model. So for OpenAI, that's GPT. Is it 0101? It's the one with the one after it. And this model is, again, kind of behind the scenes. After everything has happened, it looks at multiple outputs and then kind of makes the best one available to you based on its training. So that all requires, according to these companies, a whole heck of a lot of data and a whole heck of a lot of processing power, which means a whole heck of a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars to train these models. That's what Anthropic says. That's what OpenAI says. Well, we find this model that comes out of China from DeepSeek that is able to, according to the company, create this reasoning model that has been able to do so at a scale that is like 90% less than what we've seen up to this point, and do so with sanctions in place that would suggest that the company is not able to use the most advanced chips that are available. Well, what does that mean? It means that the company that makes the most advanced chips available for this kind of thing, NVIDIA, is not seen as valuable as it once was, which results in a huge loss of money for NVIDIA's valuation or current value, and kind of some shuffling around with the major tech companies, except for Meta and Apple, taking a hit due to this DeepSeek model. But there's one more aspect of this that's involved, which is that we don't necessarily know what is truth, what is fiction, and how these AI models were trained exactly and what was done to train them. Because we do know that DeepSeek purchased quite a few of NVIDIA's chips before the US started putting in place the sanctions that made it not as easily possible for a company to get these chips, and at least in some part used those as part of the training process. On top of that, there is suggestion that that DeepSeek made use of some of the reasoning models, the leading reasoning models in the US from Anthropic and from OpenAI to help train its final or its current R1 model. And basically, using what was already made available to help further it along. And this is my last thing before we kind of can break into this, because there's one more layer to this, which is that it turns out many of the AI companies do that's part of the process. Is you build on what you have, or you build on what's open source, or you build on what's already there to help further along your models. So much so that a lot of the models that are being bandied about are in part trained on data that has been created by AI in the first place. That there's not enough data that is actually created by human beings in the world that's made available to them. So they have to generate a bunch of data that is resembling human data to be able to further train their models. It's a house of cards. It is a house of cards, and at least a couple of cards got pulled from somewhere.
A house of canards.
Yeah,
sorry, that's
exactly.
No, it's too far. This is a fascinating story, I think, for a few reasons. One, I particularly love OpenAI getting bent out of shape about DeepSeek using their IP without their consideration, which is a thing that OpenAI has been doing for years to train its model, is taking everybody else's data to do this. So, live by the sword, die by the sword, I guess. I feel like, the biggest question around this is this the end of the AI bubble? And my guess is no, I don't think it's probably entirely going away because of this, but I think this may dent the enthusiasm.
Yes.
Because it does point out that there are potential options that don't require, there's no secret sauce, right? A lot of these models are built on the same fundamentals, and therefore OpenAI's models might be good, but it doesn't mean that they're uncatchable or that they have stuff that nobody else can replicate, because a lot of this underlying technology is kind of understood broadly at a theoretical level. Mm-hmm. So some of it may be more dependent on, say, what access to hardware you have, or specific tweaks might change certain things and make certain models slightly better at some things and slightly better at other things. I've heard that from a lot of friends who use all these various models and say, like, well, I sometimes use this one for this purpose, or I use this one for this purpose because it's better at that. I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of like, well, this one's a little better here and this one's a little better here, but a lot of them are kind of comparable. And once that happens, it's essentially commoditized. And once it's commoditized, there's not as much excitement about it because it's a commodity. Mm-hmm. So, I think this is sort of the first dent into the AI bubble. I'm kind of curious to see what happens from here. There was also a news this week about Alibaba had designed an AI model that they said was better than DeepSeek. So, there's a lot happening in this sort of realm right now, and I think a lot of questions about exactly what these things do. Plus, all of that's on top of all the issues with AI in general that people have been wrestling with, whether it's use of IP without consideration, whether it's environmental impact, whether it's utility, and accuracy, right? All of those things are still sort of sitting out there as issues with these things. But maybe now that there's a bit of a crack in terms of how good and how efficient these models are, some of those things, other factors, will carry more weight in the criticism.
Yeah. I like that competition is important, and it really does drive forth progress. In particular, when it comes to, I think if a company gets to, we're so far ahead of everything else and, we're untouchable, that is not going to, the space race we didn't achieve success in the space race because we were just like, we've got this. It was like, oh no, we have to be first. We've got to beat, it's why it's a race. Yeah, and so right. I think that in the same way, you almost don't want to see anyone pull so far ahead, because then you get things like, one company deciding they can charge way more, and that everybody just has to play ball. And we know how that all works out in the end. So
that's how you end up with monopoly. Yeah, I think for sure. So the competition is good. I'm not going to cry a river for OpenAI worrying about their model getting used. Sorry, that's you made that bed yourself. Okay, sorry. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see after all the hype around AI over the last year. It's going to be really interesting to see what the next year brings. I think it's going to be potentially profoundly different.
Absolutely. We shall see. Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join me today to talk about these great stories of the week. If people would like to keep up with what you're doing and buy your books, where should they go to do so?
Well, you can find everything that I do over on my website, which, yes, is a WordPress blog, but I assure you that there's no malware on it. dmoren.com. I also write over at sixcolors.com, and you can hear me every week with Mikah on the Clockwise podcast over at relay.fm. Check it out.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. All right, we're going to take another quick break before we head into my interview this week with Pebble creator extraordinaire Eric Migicovsky, who joined me earlier today on some exciting news. We'll get to that, but let me tell you about Veeam, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Without your data, your customers' trust turns to digital dust. And that is why Veeam's data protection and ransomware recovery, it's so appropriate we're talking about this. Ransomware recovery ensures that you can secure and restore your enterprise data wherever and whenever you need it, no matter what happens. As the #1 global market leader in data resilience, Veeam is trusted by more than 77% of the Fortune 500 to keep businesses running when digital disruptions like ransomware strike. I just saw a news story this morning about a ransomware issue, and I thought, wow, if only they had Veeam. That's because Veeam lets you back up and recover your data instantly across your entire cloud ecosystem, proactively detect malicious activity, remove the guesswork by automating your recovery plans and policies, and you can also get real-time support from ransomware recovery experts. Data is the lifeblood of your business, so get data resilient with Veeam. Go to veeam.com to learn more. That's veeam.com to learn more. And thank you, Veeam, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. All right, it's time for the movie magic of checking out this interview I had earlier this morning. Nostalgia. Gotta love it. I spent this morning actually digging around through my boxes because I did just recently move, trying to find the device I know is hiding out somewhere, my Pebble. And that is because there's some great news to talk about when it comes to Pebble. Joining us today to talk about that great news is Eric Migicovsky. Welcome back, Eric. How are you?
Thank you. It's good to be back. There's a blast from the past this week.
Although I hear for you, it's not quite a blast from the past because you've been using your Pebble for a while. I want to talk about that. That's awesome. It's right there on your wrist. So let's kick things off though. If somebody were not familiar with Pebble and what we're talking about here, maybe we should start there. Although again, I have a feeling that this crowd either has owned one or has heard about it.
It's funny. It's been so long that there are people who they were alive when Pebble came out, but they weren't part of the tech ecosystem and community. And I've been talking to them, and it's kind of fun. They're like, "What's Pebble? What is that?" I'm like, "How old are you?" And I'm high school. There was something special about Pebble that brought it to a really wide audience, and I'm kind of excited that 8 years later, a new generation might hear about it. So for those who haven't had the pleasure, Pebble is and was one of the first smartwatches. I think I don't know if we coined the term, but I started working on smartwatches in 2008, originally making one for BlackBerry, another blast from the past.
Wow.
So the first watch that I made worked with BlackBerry. And then in 2012, we announced Pebble. And Pebble was the first watch that really went viral. People heard about it. What made Pebble special, though, is, and I guess we could chat about this more, also, coincidentally, the reason why I think it's time to bring it back. So what made Pebble a Pebble was its e-paper screen, which is a low-power, always-on, daylight-readable, reflective screen, rather than emissive, which pushes light out of it. There's e-paper, long battery life, lasted for a week plus. Fairly simple feature set. Like, we didn't try to boil the ocean and do everything that your phone could do. Focused on things like notifications, telling time. Who would expect your watch to be really good at telling time? Music control. We had physical buttons. We have physical buttons on the watch, so you could press the button to play, pause, skip tracks. You don't have to look at a touch screen and hit the right tiny little icon. And it was hackable. Anyone who wanted could write a watch face or build an app for Pebble. And that was it, basically. Like, there's, a lot more that people did with it, but that was the core of what Pebble is.
Yeah, and I think that's what ended up being the delight for many people. You talk about in your blog post kind of the surprise of all those watch faces that are available for Pebble that were not for the Apple Watch. So we should not continue to kind of beat around the bush here. What's the new news? Because I think people will be very excited about this.
Yeah, so the big news this week is that Google open sourced Pebble OS. So in 2016, Pebble sold its IP to Fitbit. Fitbit got bought by Google. And so, there's always a bigger fish world in tech. Pebble now is under Google. They weren't doing anything with it. And so about a year ago, I asked very politely if they could open source the Pebble OS code base. Now, this is the software that runs on the watch itself. And they said yes.
Wow.
They didn't have to, and I'm incredibly thankful that they did. And on Monday, they published a GitHub repo that has the entire source code for Pebble's operating system. This was unavailable before. There was no way to build software for Pebble or kind of compile and run the Pebble operating system. It still works perfectly. That's the crazy part. Like, this watch is 8 years old, 9 years old. It hasn't had an update in 8 years.
Wow.
And it still works great. And I think that's a testament to the quality of engineering work and product design that the Pebble team put in, between 2012 and 2016. In that it still works. Like, what other gadgets do you have from 10 years ago that you could turn on, connect to a phone?
Right.
Like, you can't, the first generation Apple Watch doesn't even work anymore.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really stood out to me. The folks at iFixit helped with the making sure that if your battery had gone bad in your Pebble, that you could get a replacement for that. And it's funny, the Pebble, because I do still have mine, because I think it's just a testament to that time. And also, it was for me that moment of excitement of not only a Kickstarter project being a success and being part of that, but also it actually shipping. So all of that is built into this totem that is the Pebble smartwatch for me.
And in my opinion, like, I think we've lost a little bit of that gadget awe and optimism that maybe we had in spades 10 plus years ago. Like, there was an era of gadget blogging that I loved, like the Gizmodo and Gadget, where I was a bit younger, and I just loved reading about gadgets. There was something special to me about a gadget because it's like a gadget that just doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not trying to change the world. It's just there. It exists, and maybe it helps you smile a little bit during the day. It doesn't, have to be more than that. And I think we doubled down on that at Pebble. Like, we made it quirky and fun. The OS had these little flares, like when you were charging the watch, a coffee cup, like the icon was a coffee cup that would fill up to the brim and there'd be a little bit of steam rising off the top of the cup. Like, that was fun.
Surprise and delight, right?
Yeah.
And this is, so I want to talk about what's been going on between the time that Pebble was acquired by Fitbit, which was then acquired by Google, and now, because there were some people out there who figured out how to make it work. Can you talk about the open source hacky community?
I took a break starting in 2016. I'd spent 9 years working on smartwatches, and I was like, "This is good. We built something nice. Go do something else." I went to work at Y Combinator for a bit. But luckily for me and for the entire Pebble community, an open source group of hackers called the Rebel Alliance, REBBLE, took it upon themselves to reverse engineer the web services that Pebble had, the App Store, and offer that as free software to the community. And so for the last 8 years, this group, the Rebel Alliance, has been hosting hackathons, sponsoring contests to build new Pebble apps, and basically keeping the community kind of fresh and enthusiastic. You can see on their Discord, there's thousands of people that are chatting about Pebble. And one thing that I love is you can still go to the Pebble subreddit, r/Pebble. And every week there's like someone posting about, or actually every day probably, there's people posting about Pebble and sharing their favorite watch faces, or even new apps. Like 8 years later, after there are no more watches being built, people were still writing new apps for Pebble, which is pretty special.
Now, how many iterations of Pebble did the company make before Pebble was acquired by Fitbit? I couldn't remember if it was 2 or 3.
There was Pebble, the OG Pebble, as we called it, in 2012. Pebble Steel in 2014. Pebble Time in 2015, and then Pebble 2 in 2016.
Got it. So there were 4 total. Yes, Pebble Steel was one that escaped my memory. So now we're talking about with Pebble's operating system being open sourced, and with the I think still robust and excited community that exists there. Is it time to bring back Pebble? Are we going to have new hardware? That's kind of wild. That's kind of exciting.
So I have a problem. I'm running out of Pebbles. Luckily, I obviously, having worked at Pebble, I had a big stash. And so over the last 10 years, I've been kind of working my way through. But, even great hardware doesn't last forever.
Right.
Albeit it's lasted extraordinarily long. You can replace the batteries, like you mentioned. iFixit has a bunch of tutorials on how to do it. You go on YouTube, and there's like how to replace the Pebble buttons, how to replace the Pebble everything. It's cool. But I used to tell people that you could buy a Pebble on eBay, but the prices are either skyrocketing like hundreds of dollars, or there's just none available anymore. So what's going to happen? I decided to start making new Pebble Watch hardware that will run Pebble OS. I'm going to do it a little bit differently this time. So whereas last time we did it as kind of a prototypical startup, we raised money, built out a big team, had up to 100 plus people working at Pebble. It taught me a lot about how to build a sustainable operation. And this time around, I think the number one goal is how do we build this in a sustainable manner? And I mean that sustainable in that we will continue building hardware long into the future and continue being able to support the operating system and update it and publish new features and that kind of thing. So we're starting small. We're not going to try to do too much all at once. We're going to build, a watch and get it out there and see what people think. And then if it's successful and we earn enough money, we'll reinvest that in building, maybe more watches. We'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it. But the name of the game is sustainability. So it's going to be a small company, no venture backing, and just, building kind of in public and taking it one step at a time.
Yeah. Is that, I feel like that's not common these days, right? That you say no venture backing, and that in and of itself, to me, it's giving an underdog vibe in a good way. I mean that in like a, you're cheering it on. You're saying, what can you do in that very small, sustainable way? But you would know better than I when it comes to, I guess it's the mixture of hardware and not going venture backing that is interesting. Do you feel like it's because of your knowledge up to this point of the things that you made? I even read about the I think it was a relative of yours who was asking you for help hacking a BlackBerry to display things on the ceiling. Like, you clearly have some electrical engineering knowledge there.
So I think the essence of this is, I wrote a blog post 10 years after the first Kickstarter, kind of reminiscing and looking back and kind of analyzing some of the story. I think what I recognized is that I think I'm more of an inventor than an entrepreneur.
Okay.
I love creating products and I love using those products. And I very greedily want this product to exist. And so my plan is to make sure that the elements that are needed to keep building these type of products exist. And that doesn't necessitate selling tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of watches. Like, we can build, like I said, a sustainable company without having to make it big. If it's big, great, but it doesn't have to be. And I think most of the premise of a traditional startup is that, the definition of a startup based on kind of PG's, Paul Graham's work is, startup is a company that's designed to grow quickly. And I think this is not a startup. Mm-hmm. It's this company designed to build great products, get them out into the world. And if growth happens, great, but it's not a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds very much like a passion project. I think lastly, I'd ask anything you can share for the people who are curious. You had a little bit of an FAQ that we'll of course link to, but are we imagining a watch that is 3 times the size of the current one? What are we expecting when it comes to this?
Expect literally a Pebble. Expect whatever the last Pebble you had. Expect that. Mm-hmm. This is also recognizing. I think I've recognized that products and software can be done. You can finish something. It doesn't have to continually change and add new features and . You can be done something. And I'm not saying that Pebble is done in that there's literally never going to be a change ever again.
Right.
But
right.
I'm still using the same watch with the same software that was there 8 years ago. It's better than the alternative, which is wild to me that like no one in the last 8 years has built something that's remotely comparable or usable to the set of features that I'm looking for out of a smartwatch. Mm-hmm. And plenty of people in the last couple of days have talked to me and said, oh, is it going to have this feature? Is it going to have that feature? Is it going to be like this? I'm like, no, it's going to be like a Pebble. There's plenty of other options. Like there's just no options for the people that want this exact set of features. And that's all we're saying.
Nice. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on the show, for getting us excited about the return of Pebble, and of course the open sourced code that you went and said, hey, look, is it possible you could make this available? And that's pretty cool too. So all of that work coming together, I know that there are many people out there who are listening to the show who, like I said, probably own Pebble or Pebbles, and are looking forward to seeing what's next. So thank you again for your time. And if people want to stay up to date with everything, is there a place that they should go to follow you? Or tell us about that.
Check out repebble.com. Sign up for the waitlist. We'll be sharing a lot more information about new stuff, how you can help if you want to be part of the community and help kind of on the software side as well. Join the fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much again, Eric, for joining us. And thank all of you for being here for this episode of Tech News Weekly. Of course, our show publishes every Thursday right here, twit.tv/TNW. That is where you can go to subscribe to the audio and video versions of the show. And now is the time where I remind you to please join Club Twit at twit.tv/clubtwit for just $7 a month, although we are running a free trial 2 weeks to check it out. You can gain access to some pretty awesome things. The big one, the most important one, is ad-free versions of all of our content. You also gain access to the Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra stuff you won't find anywhere else. And you will also gain access to the Discord server, a fun place to go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and also those of us here at Twit. If you would like to be part of the club, again, that's twit.tv/clubtwit, just $7 a month. And to those of you who are members who are watching this live, so you're hearing me talk about it, twit.tv/clubtwit/referral is where you want to go to earn free months of Club Twit. So thank you for your support. And let me remind all of you that if you'd like to follow me online, I'm at Mikah Sargent on many a social media network, or you can head to chihuahua.coffee. That's CHIHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. Be sure to check out my other shows, Hands on Tech, Hands on Mac, iOS Today, which are all available to you and in ad-free video versions as members of the club, but also available to you folks in the public as audio with ads. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you again next week for another episode of Tech News Weekly. Bye-bye.